is identity at the center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Hey, good, man. We're in the land of the mouse.
Yes.
Mickey Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at InfoSec World 2025. As you can see from the background banner.
Yep.
So we've got a little recording booth. It's out on the expo floor. And I've had some great conversation already. One thing that you can be sure is clear is that identity and the world of identity is on the mind of the information security practitioner.
Yeah, well, I don't think you can avoid that in any specific way. I mean, it's everywhere. You could say it's at the center, like some podcasts. Yeah. So shout out to Shirley from Cyber Risk Alliance for, helping us out, getting us set up. Shout out to RSM for sponsoring or partnering, I guess you're saying, I don't know what the right word is, but, having us out here. So, that is our day job. The podcast is the night and weekend stuff, but it's very cool to come out to this conference. First time I've been to this conference, so I'm kind of taking it in a little bit. And I will say it's going to be very distracting for me as I'm talking to you, because as I look past you, there is a company. I won't name them just in case people aren't into it, but they're all wearing like witches hats and wizard hats. And it's like a trick or treat theme. And so I know I'm going to be looking at that as I look past you for this episode. So if I,
just think of it as your family reunion over there, and that.
Yeah, right. One of the things that was very cool is we came out here, and Ross, who we'll introduce here in a second, came up to me and said, "Oh, I got a podcast." Like, "Oh, we have a podcast too." And we just started talking, and then we realized, like, oh my gosh, so the podcast is CISO Tradecraft. Yeah, we've got Ross and we've got Mark, G Mark, the OG Mark.
I don't have an O in there. Okay. It's that Irish, but the O is not at the beginning.
All right, so G Mark, and they have a podcast called CISO Tradecraft, CISOTradecraft.com. And we were starting talking and saying, oh my gosh, we're using the same tools. We have very similar formats. You guys have been going weekly for 5 years. There's a lot of parallels here. Mm-hmm. And so why don't we just go ahead and start there? So Ross, I'll start with you since you're in my line of sight. So tell me a little bit about, first of all, how did you get into information security? And then tell us a bit about the podcast. How did you, get that thing going with Gmark here?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people who always wanted to be in cybersecurity. I used to say, I want to be the guy that when the Chinese go to sleep, they're thinking about me at nighttime, right? And it's just the coolest thing. I grew up in Las Vegas, and there's magicians there. So they're always doing magic tricks. And when I learned how to start doing hand hacking and pen testing, it's kind of the same way. The trick, and so you know how it works. But anybody else, it's just like magic, oh my gosh, you could do that? And so that was the thing. I went and I studied computer science. I got an MBA in cybersecurity, and I did this program called Scholarship for Service, where they said, hey, we will pay your master's and pay you to go to grad school if you just work for the government. I said, sounds amazing, because I want to go to NSA or CIA and be a nation state actor, and that's what happened. So I had a fantastic career, and years later I decided to, share some of this tradecraft back, and Gmark and I started a podcast 5 years ago.
So what was what was it that was oh, we should start a podcast?
So I was at Capital One, and I was a director, and then I took a job as a CISO at Caterpillar Financial, and all my friends were like, how do I copy paste what you just did, right? And so I had the same conversation over and over and over. And I was like, I need to just record this once as a podcast and then say, hit play, right? Why do I need to have this 45-minute? And so Gmark, he was the SANS instructor on cybersecurity leadership. So I said, that's who I want as my co-host. And I kind of, finagled him to come join me.
Well, he had something about me having a face for radio. So.
You definitely have a voice for it, that's for sure. You've got great pipes, right, as we say in the biz. So let's find out about your background. You mentioned the SANS instructor, but how did you get into InfoSec?
I get in cybersecurity. My first full-time job doing cybersecurity, I'm going to date myself here because, nobody else will, 1976. Got hired by the state of New York to plug all the holes that all the high school kids had punch in their systems, of which I was probably the finder about 80 or 90% of them. Just saying. But I wanted to be one of the good guys. I always wanted to be the person who went ahead and made things work, not the person who broke stuff. And so after that, went on, sold my soul for my college degree, took a Navy ROTC scholarship to Northwestern, did degrees in computer science and mathematics, and then off to the fleet. And then about 5 years into my Navy career, I'm due for a Cure Tour. It's like, hey, I want to go to work for a three-letter agency like NSA. So I was able to get a set of orders to NSA. And then I got this call from Washington a couple of weeks later from a detailer, the person who owns your career, saying, Lieutenant, what are you trying to do? I says, I'm trying to go to NSA. Well, why would you do that? I want to do computer security. Now, here's a quote for the ages. The Navy has no need for computer security. You're going back out to sea. It's like, but this is what I want to do, and I got a shore tour coming up. Well, then came the big lie. If you take this job, kiss your career goodbye. You'll never promote past lieutenant. Well, detailers make their points by putting square pegs in square holes and round pegs in round holes. That was definitely the wrong shaped peg for that hole. So I was like, well, what do? I love the Navy, I love cybersecurity, but I can't apparently do both. So not being able to perceive what was true or was not, I left active duty, went to work for Booz Allen Hamilton, stuck around in the reserves, and 2 years, 6 months after I left, I started National Security Corporation, named after the job I could never get. So here we are many years later, and have continued to do the cybersecurity stuff. And as Ross had said, this is our opportunity to go ahead and help a lot of other people with their careers, because you get to a certain point where you're in the give back phase of your career path. And I'm trying to see what can I do to help the next generation of cybersecurity experts not just know the technical merit of things, but how do they navigate their way through their technical part of their career, through their management years, into their leadership years, and ultimately become enough political awareness to be successful as a C-level.
So you mentioned the P word, politics.
Yeah.
Comes up everywhere. And
Layer 8, yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that people have to deal with. So I got to ask, that Navy person that told you there was no career there,
Right.
Did you ever touch base with that person again?
No, and it's probably just as well, because there was a guy who was a year behind me, who also spent 5 years at sea, who also put in for orders for NSA, but if you will, drank the Kool-Aid and changed career patterns to cryptography or cryptologist. Well, a cryptologist back then wasn't really breaking code. You're sitting there listening to the Soviet Union, and then years later that became cyber. Well, the guy who was a year behind me was Mike Rogers. And Admiral Mike Rogers retired as the director of NSA, so I had a 12-month jump on the guy. Not that I could have done what he did, because a lot of it has to do with politics. You'll make it to captain or colonel on leadership skills. You make it to admiral or general on political skills. And that's something that at the time I was just not good at. I'm probably still not very good at it, but I recognize that as a weakness. So that's kind of one of the things we put out to our people, is that if you don't like politics, don't aspire to a job that requires it. You'll be miserable every day.
So you guys talk to a lot of CISOs. Ross, I'll start with you. Do you guys have a lot of CISOs on your show? And what is top of mind for those folks right now?
Yeah, we definitely bring in a lot of CISOs. We bring in a lot of people with industry expertise. I would say right now there's a couple of things that are top of mind. The first thing I would say is AI security. How do I secure my MCPs? How do I make sure my employees aren't uploading sensitive data to ChatGPT? How do I think about the models in my tools? Are they corrupted? Are they good? A lot of that is being talked about. And the other thing I would say is identity is also a big thing. Certainly if we look at the Verizon data breach report, it's the number one most attacked thing, but also the deep fake. How do I actually know what to trust when I see a video of my CEO with a girl? Was it real? Was it true? I don't know. And how do I defend that? And things like that, I think, are also starting to come up more and more.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the whole AI conundrum, and we'll get into that. But even in the identity space, you talk about there's AI for identity, and then there's identity for AI. So that makes it kind of interesting. It's like two different angles. You can't just use the term AI for everything, right? So G-Mark, do you have anything to kind of add to that in terms of what's top of mind for CISOs right now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern that people are looking at their careers. And we hear that, there's millions and millions of cybersecurity jobs unfilled. Yeah, go try to find one. But what we're also finding when you talk about AI and those careers is that there's a lot of pressure from organizations to control costs. There always is. But now they're saying, don't hire any junior people, just turn it over to AI. What we run the risk of is creating a vacuum in our career pattern where there's going to be 1 or 2 or N years of few to no people, so that when you need them at year 3 to 5 to 7 to 9, unless AI gets super, super complicated, they're not going to be there. And the other thing is, Ross was talking about, was identity. And you talk about identity at the center. I'd also assert that identity is your new perimeter, because you can't rely on a firewall to say everything is behind the firewall. It just don't get behind that, because everything is distributed. And ultimately, the attackers are saying, yeah, your technology is pretty good, 0 days are pretty expensive, but boy, if I could become you for a day, look at all the damage I can do. And then, as Ross had mentioned, with the deep fakes and some of the really quality tool sets that are out there, as a CISO, I'm not so worried about the technology breaking as I am my people holding the door open for the bad guys, because they didn't know any better. And it's kind of on us to make sure that everybody realizes just what those capacities are out there.
And I'll just share what...
Oh, go ahead.
And I'll just share one more thing that I thought was really interesting about identity. IAM's just released a paper on their blog where they showed the cost of identity between a small and a medium and a large company. And there were no economies of scale. That means if you're a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500, you're paying more per person to do identities than a small company. So there's a lot of opportunity to innovate, because it shouldn't get more expensive. It should get cheaper.
I have a son who's a junior cybersecurity major, and I remember telling him, like, there's so many jobs, there's more jobs than there are people. Is that still true? Because I think his generation is starting to get the message that AI is going to take all the jobs that people like you are going to school for.
You can still get a job sweeping floors, but the thing, I mean that kind of flippantly, but the point is this, is we take a look at what are the skill sets that are being replaced by AI. What is it good at? It's good at, if you will, what we call cognitive processes, processing data and coming up with an answer. It's good for doing mathematical calculations that need to be precise, but you're doing lots and lots and lots of them. It's good for tedium, where things like that. You go right down the list of all the things that we look at that kind of fall within the area of cybersecurity, and we go, that's a little bit concerning as compared to being a plumber or a carpenter or somebody that's out there. Physical proximity and the ability to interact with physical devices is going to be one of the last frontiers for AI. Okay, you're not going to see a Terminator robot out there with a hammer and a bunch of nails working on your house anytime soon. And so the concern, therefore, is that if somebody is a junior and senior, and then, like, where are the jobs? Of course, the first source of retreat is, Dad, I want to go to grad school. I can put off reality for another year. So get prepared for that. Introduce them to the concept of scholarship for service, because it's a good alternative to paying for it by mom and dad. But the other one is that somebody needs to be able to own these things going forward. There's a generational gap. We find out that when you get gray hair or your forehead becomes a 5-head and you get on in years, that you're not thinking about technology the same way you used to. When you're young, you tend to willing to be embracing new ideas, you're going to try more, and you're willing to fail more to have less at risk. You can fail spectacularly at your job at age 21 and recover at age 21 in 3 months. But try doing it at 50 or 60 and lose everything. It's a little bit harder to start over at that point. So I think what you're going to find then is the way that you'd portray yourself going into the job market is make the lack of years of experience an asset. I'm not beholden to any old ideas. Things are changing very rapidly. Years ago, I wrote G. Mark's Law as a corollary to Moore's Law. Half of what you know about cybersecurity will be obsolete in 18 months. Anybody who had a Windows 10 machine, guess what, last week? And if you go back 2 cycles, 3 years, nobody was doing prompt engineering. Nobody's doing ChatGPT. It just wasn't there yet. And then you go another 18 months from now, another 18 months. So it changes very, very rapidly. So the hiring managers are going to be using an old metric saying dollars per person or programmers by the pound. You need to convince the management that you need a different metric. And a different metric is somebody who could think at the speed of the evolution of the technology, can adapt to that, and is willing to go ahead and put the time and effort into mastering new technologies. Even if it dead ends, you haven't dead-ended the career of a senior executive vice president, and this person can still dust themselves off and say, well, you just learned a whole bunch of things that would be very applicable someplace else. So just never give up on yourself.
But it's tough to find a job that will let you do that, especially as a entry-level person, let's say, into the market, right? It's your leaders who are bringing those people in need to encourage that sort of fail fast, learn things, etc.
There's always the federal agent. I mean, as I said, I sold my soul for my college degree with an ROTC scholarship. Now when you go in the Navy, it was my choice, all of a sudden you find yourself, I remember an old recruiting poster, it said, be on the board of directors at 22. And it showed a destroyer wardroom of about the 14 officers sitting around the table, and there are a couple of junior officers there. I didn't have any college debt coming out of my undergraduate because the Navy had paid for that. I had a guaranteed job. And people who, for example, do scholarship for service, I've spent 9 years working on the advisory board for National Cyber Watch. And what we did is we aligned the curriculum from 2-year schools to 4-year schools so that you could go to a community college for 2 years, then go on to a 4-year school like Hopkins, have 100% of those credits transfer to go over to Hopkins without having to retake courses. And, oh, by the way, if you use scholarship for service to pay for the latter 2 years, you then have a guaranteed job with the federal government. You're going to probably now, at the end of that cycle, have an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, 2 years of job experience, most likely 1 or 2 certs in the security world, and 0 debt. And that, I think, is the master recipe for being able to move forward and not worrying about it, because there will always be requirements for expertise in the military and in civil service. As you get closer to the top, the pay isn't all that great. But when you're 22 years old and you've been living in a dorm room, what's the difference whether you're making X or 1.3X? It's still your life, and you'll be fine. You've got grab that experience and go with it. It's very fungible later on.
So let's take it back to the CISO. Where does identity fit from a ranking perspective with CISOs? You know, Ross, like when you're talking with folks, is identity the first word that comes out of the mouth? Is it the second, third? Does it not come out of certain mouths? Like, help me gauge where CISOs are at today when it comes to identity.
So it's not as high as you think AI or product security is. But at the same time, I've also seen a shift over the last 5 years where identity may have belonged to the network or the help desk team, now squarely falls under the CISO. It's one of the pillars along with GRC and product security and the SOC. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussions of how do we MFA all of the things? How do we protect against stolen identities and customer fraud? But I would probably put it as like a 8th priority on the list of priorities for CISOs today.
Concur?
Identity, you're looking for yes or no, and or maybe. Yeah, we'll always equivocate.
Right.
But I was talking to one of the vendors over here a little bit earlier, and they had their little authentication card. Oh, great, it'll call all the certs. Said, how many certs does it store? 30. I said, if I go to my Microsoft Authenticator, I have more than 30, and this is the bat phone. And my regular phone here, I've got another 20 some odd. So between these two, I've got 50 different identities that I have to manage. And those are just the ones that I've been able to enable MFA for. And so where identity becomes extraordinarily important is any system that is critical, and I would say any system, period, that you're going to touch, you ought to have some sort of MFA involved. Why is that important? Because passwords can be socially engineered. Somebody goes ahead and can create an artificial identity that looks like the CEO or looks like the help desk or whatever, and people cough things up. Phishing campaigns, vishing campaigns, smishing campaigns, and the like. All those combine to do what? Single-factor authentication, saying my identity consists of an ID and a password, doesn't work anymore. And we have something you know, something you are, something you have, but we have a 4th identity factor, has to do with those little GPS things up there, someplace you are. And now I can go ahead and say, wait a minute, you're trying to log in from Romania, but 5 minutes ago you were in Orlando? That's sort of impossible travel, and that's a factor that I should consider. So I think we're extending our concept of what identity is to include a number of factors that have to be thought about, because attackers are going to try to get around the controls. They've realized their technical controls are getting pretty good. You're not going to go ahead and find a dozen 0 days anytime soon. But boy, can you go ahead and convince a user to hold the door open for you digitally? You win. So I think identity is a big target for attackers, and it has to be one of the things we defend the most.
Ross, having heard that, do you want to jump back in? Because I was thinking, as you were saying your answers, I think you said like 8th, right? It's kind of on the list. Is that also maybe because the CISO might be thinking that they're good enough at it from an identity standpoint where they do need to focus on other things?
I think there's things that are top of mind for a CISO, like how do I get my budget approved? What do I do for AI security? And those are right now top of mind for where I would put things. Now, where there's some novel space is I would say agents. How do we trust an agent, and what level of capabilities do we give that person? Is it going to be the same as a human, or are we going to really limit that agent and not give it the full permission? So that may be something that's kind of up there. The other thing that I would say is kind of a nightmare is not the human identity. I think, the PAM systems do that pretty well. It's the non-human identities. And when you look at the numbers, there's something like 40 non-human identities, laptops, servers, APIs, all of those things that require permissions. And it is very much the wild, wild west. You go to a Fortune 500 company, say, tell me how many non-human identities you have. Show me how that's being governed. And I think you will just, it's perfect for Halloween. I think that's just maybe what we should dress up as, right?
Trick or treat, here's the bazillion machine and non-human identities in your organization. Good luck.
Well, I feel like you've got workforce identity, customer identity, you've got the non-human identity. It's like the space keeps getting bigger and bigger and more complicated. I mean, I feel sometimes like we're identity practitioners. We've devoted our careers to understanding this space, and sometimes it's like overwhelming to me. I'm wondering, like, how is it for CISOs? Are they overwhelmed by it? Do they have their arms around it? And then, kind of tangential to that, I feel like a lot more CISOs are coming from identity backgrounds into CISO-ship. Are you seeing that as a real trend?
I haven't seen it as much because identity and having a deputy CISO and identity is still pretty new, probably 5 years or less. So we just haven't seen those folks come in. Now, certainly if you're going to go to a network company, let's say you're going to be the head of a Cisco as the CISO there, I absolutely think something like that would be extremely important. Historically, we've seen more CISOs come from the GRC side because you're a highly regulated bank and you need someone who understands all that compliance. Or you have someone who grew up in the SOC and it's a post-breach scenario. Hey, our company just had a bad issue. We need to bring someone in who can fix this and don't let it happen again. Now behind the scenes, identity may be the most important thing to implement, but historically they brought, the head of a SOC who understands that cleanup, and that may be something that changes in the future.
What about you, G-Mark? Do you think that CISOs have a comfort level with identity, or are they coming more and more from an identity background?
I think at the end of the day, most CISOs make decisions based on what's in the best interest for themselves and their own careers. Now, you're not trying to be saying it's self-centered, but let's think about it. You're not going to go ahead and do something very risky without a very good reason, because otherwise, all right, sorry, you lost your job. Now, I think one of the other presenters was talking about how when the Fortune 500, the CISOs are playing musical chairs. You move here, then 2 years later, you're there, and 2 years later. I got a buddy of mine who's been a CISO 8 different times. And I think like, wow, I can't hold down a job? Well, he's actually adding value every place he goes. So why am I bringing that up? Because when you look at things such as identity, if it's something you understand, it's something that you're something you're comfortable with, you'll make decisions accordingly, and you feel that this is going to go ahead and preserve where I am, and of course, career-wise, it helps out. But if you don't understand something, then you either look for an expert to help you, or you try to gain the knowledge yourself, or you ignore it. Well, number 2 is difficult because as a CISO, you got way too many things to be doing. And so you go back to number 1 or number 3. As Ross was saying, the concept of having a deputy CISO for identity, fairly new and not fairly prevalent. And the last part is like, well, do I just ignore it and hope it goes away?
And what I would say is a proxy for who's going to be the next CISO usually is headcount. So if the identity team is 10 people, but the SOC is 50 people, that deputy CISO over the SOC much more likely to get promoted into that CISO role than the smaller team.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. You're absolutely right. I don't know why I didn't think about it that before, but yeah, that's the way it works. So let's stay with that track of money. So CISOs, they're constantly being pitched projects by either themselves, the rest of the organization, or parts of their information security, organization. What are some tips that, people listening to this are probably in identity? just probably, right? We're not on Netflix, so I'm assuming they're identity practitioners.
Hey, come over to the dark side with identity. We've got cookies.
That's right. So how do those people make those pitches to CISOs or maybe other parts of the organization that control funding? I want to invest in this program or project or technology to solve for this issue. How do they make that investment sell?
Why do I make any investment? Because it either is going to improve my return on investment, that's what the MBAs want, or it's going to reduce my risk, which indirectly improves my return on investment. The hard part on return on security investment, or ROSI, it's like return on seatbelt investment. Hey, I put my seatbelt on every single time I drive a car. Been doing that for many, many years. It's never saved my life. Why do I keep doing it? Because in the event of some low probability, high impact event, it's going to save my life.
It's not the click it or ticket marketing that's doing that?
I'm not worried about the plate. On the other end, yeah, you're worried about Officer Friendly pulling you over there. And, like, hey, sir, if I gave you one of my beer bottles, we call it even. But what we take a look at then is, if I can't educate the CISO because he's too busy, can we then do it incrementally? And what do I mean by that? One of the things that Ross and I have built with the CISO Tradecraft podcast, which, as you said, we're done with 5 years, 256 episodes, is we've created bite-sized chunks of knowledge that are what we consider high nutritional value. There's no marketing fluff in there. We don't keep talking just, we still got another 37 minutes to go to fill out the podcast. We're done. But the idea there is that we're trying to create a place, a watering hole, if you will, for CISOs to, not in the negative sense of watering hole where you go and get malware, but you get smart. And you get a little bit smarter every day. So for somebody trying to get their CISO or their executives to understand why they should fund identity, help them get smart a little bit at a time. It doesn't mean you can't sit them down and make them listen to an 8-hour seminar, but 3 minutes here, 5 minutes here, a little discussion there, and make it around how it provides a better return for the business and an alternative investment. What would happen if somebody like the CFO believed that the CEO told her to transfer $8 million for a special private acquisition that nobody's supposed to know about, and here's the data for this bank over here in Asia? Well, that could be very expensive if it goes sideways. And now you can demonstrate that with some of the deepfake technology to say, watch this. Would you believe it?
Well, there's even the story last year, I think it was Malaysia, right, with the bank that got hit by $25 million. Because now this was, in my mind, very clearly targeted because it was, this poor person joins a call, a Teams call with the board or something, and every single person on that call was not a real person.
They're all fake.
Clearly that's targeted, but that just shows like it's getting easier to pull that off.
It's getting harder and harder to detect that. So it used to be, you said, hey, if you're a fake, put your hand up in front of your face. Well, now the deep fakes can do that. So last one I saw it said, hey, draw, if you're doing like an interview, for example, you want to make sure this person's not from DPRK, draw a smiley on a piece of paper and hold it up. Well, AI hasn't quite figured that out, but it will. Yeah. So ideally what it comes down to is to have either unpublished knowledge that's shared mutually or what we call like a code word. What do I mean by that? Hey, what did we have for dinner last night, Ross? Yeah, maybe you're not Ross. But if we said, we just grazed the buffet and we snarfed a whole bunch of free food from the vendors, that's what we did. But
another reation why nobody wants pictures of their food on Instagram, because now you can social engineer and say, okay, well, now I know what Ross had for dinner last night. I'm not saying you do that, but
it'd be an interesting point. So what we find then is that the sources of where these dangers are coming from are ourselves. As you had indicated, hey, here's my dinner, here's on Facebook, here's what I'm doing, here's my whole life story up here, here's my home address and things such as that. And then what we find then, and put yourself up on LinkedIn or on Facebook or one of the other identity sharing pages, and I'll use that term specifically, is that it makes it easier for adversaries as well. To salt your data, throw a little bit of fake stuff out there so you know that a person who knows you would not use the salted data, but somebody who doesn't know you would like, oh, yeah, well, we went out for such and such. Okay.
I'm 6'2", salted right
Your
there.
child named Rudolph the reindeer.
Ross, let me ask you a question around that idea of getting funding. If I am, let's say, starting out, and I've been brought in to kind of kickstart the IAM program for an organization, what are some of the questions that I should be asking myself to be able to make that case to a CISO to say, okay, it's risk-related or it is return on investment? I don't know yet. How do I figure that out?
So I think there's only two real reasons you get something funded. One is risk reduction, and the other is compliance. And I'll just give you the example of compliance first. There are standards, like if you're a bank, you have to meet the New York Department of Financial Services, which is going to require MFA for all sorts of things. I don't really get a choice. I don't want to wear an orange jumpsuit, so I'm going to do compliance to make sure that law is satisfied, especially when I'm the CISO signing my name off on that. So if somebody says we have to do it, that's tier one of what gets funded. The second thing is risk reduction. So I would always go and look at things like the Verizon data breach report and say, what are the most common attacks that we see? Because chances are we're going to get a little bit more of last year. Yeah, there's going to be something new next year where an AI agent happens to go rogue. But I guarantee if phishing and stolen session credentials and those things are bad last year, we're probably still going to see a huge overlap this year. So then I have to say, well, what am I going to do when my employee goes to a random web page, gives up their username, gives up their password, gives up their MFA challenge code? How did I still keep the company safe? Do I have Microsoft conditional access policies? Do I have, really good allow listing on the firewalls that come say, oh, this wasn't from the corporate VPN? What is it I put as these layers of defense because one human got tricked? My whole company can't go down because one person fell victim to fraud.
Yeah, and that's how they usually start, right? So shifting gears a little bit, what are you hearing from your guests in terms of how they feel AI is going to impact cybersecurity in the years to come?
Ultimately, in cybersecurity, the desirable outcomes is to do things cheaper, faster, and better than last year. So we know the bad actors are going to do things like use AI to write crafty phishing emails, use AI to auto-exploit published CVEs. We're going to have to use AI to safeguard our companies. That means, start vibe coding to fix vulnerabilities. I know that sounds scary, but imagine this. If you have 200 vulnerabilities and it takes you 30 minutes for each vuln to fix it, that means you have to spend 100 hours. What developer can give up just over 2 weeks to go fix it? Probably nobody has that luxury. But if AI vibe coding fixes that in 10 minutes, now I have the ability to go and start fixing things. And I think that's the change. And we're going to also look at that on the SOC. Hey, how do I automate the SOC? Because if the bad guys can automate their scripts and I take a 15-minute coffee break or bathroom break, I'm not fast enough. I need to agentify the SOC operator. Every little thing is going to happen like that. And specifically to identity. If the business unit says we're going to shift to just-in-time identity approvals, well, it better be just-in-time approved because I don't really feel like waiting, a week for 2 people to approve my ticket and sale point so now I can actually get the access. So those types of automation tasks, I think, are really also going to be super important.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see, Mark, what did you hear, Brian, for new guests?
I think Ross has covered a lot of it. We see what we find out is AI is inspiring an arms race. And the attackers can do more because we've democratized the specialized skills it takes to write really nefarious code. And now it doesn't take anything more than a free license and a little bit of prompt engineering to go ahead and get something that works. So Ross mentions vibe coding. Okay, great. That sounds scary, but do it. If it gets you 90% of the way there, that's 90% better than what you had before. And you go back and then you can clean up the boundaries. And it's also prioritization as well. There's an awful lot of vulnerabilities out there that really are critical path for what's critical in our organization. I don't care if somebody steals the trash. I don't care if somebody reads all the garbage as long as it's not from the sensitive bucket.
I'm glad you put that caveat in there because I was about to get it.
Yeah, I know you're going after that. I can see you squirming in your seat, just ready to jump all over your guest, right, and things like that, coming over the top of the table. But ultimately what it comes down to is understanding what is the business imperative. And the business imperative is to protect revenue, to protect the processes that generate revenue. And therefore, we protect those processes that generate revenue by ensuring that these new AI tool sets, which can operate faster and perhaps more convincingly, are not going to be as effective because we've inoculated our users, so we understand a little bit more about what's out there for the capability. We've automated some of our responses, so there's not time necessarily for a human in the loop. You don't need it. Take the first 2 or 3 steps, something that will at least hold them at the doorway and say, like, I think I got one, and your dog's like, let it go. Okay, fine, and it comes. Or throw it out. But if you just had nothing there, you're asking for trouble. So AI is here, and it's going to continue to progress. It's going to go at a very, very rapid rate, whatever we define AI to be. But think of it as a way to take deliberate processes, make them move a lot faster, take things that normally require some cognitive process and make them available to people who don't think as smart as that and things like that. And then allow the nefarious people who are out there who could then distribute this out there to multiple places. If we're aware of what that threat environment is, we can go ahead and better defend.
Ross, you guys both brought up the vibe coding. What is your sense for how prevalent that is today? Is it like all coding is going through kind of a vibe coding process now? Or is this somewhere in between, 50% and 100? What's your sense for how prevalent that approach is being used?
If we look at the GitHub state of the developer report, what you're going to see is high 80s to 90% of all developers are using AI-assisted coding tools. And that number is only going to go up because it's all about effectiveness. If I can prompt query instead of write code from scratch and searching, I can write way more code faster. Now it's going to have pros and cons. It's going to write crap code and it's going to write good code. And I have to be able to distinguish it. But the problem is the more I start to rely on it, the less I'm actually going to be able to code. I'm just going to say, does it look good? And when I look at that user interface, and if it does, hey, that's good enough for me, submit. If it doesn't, then, I'll just reprompt. So we're going to become dumber in our ability to develop, even though we write more code faster. So I think it's a totally different skill set. And now what we're going to have to do in cyber is we're going to have to shift the trust from the developers to trusting in the supply chain scanning of code as it goes through the CI/CD tools. How do I scan code for regulation adherence? Does this code meet the EU AI Act? Does it meet CCPA or HIPAA? And that's things we haven't really looked for in code. I think that'll be the next generation of where code scanning and vulnerabilities go.
So does that leave a gap then, which I think is what you were maybe getting at earlier, is you're missing sort of that middle career almost, right? Where the people who came in, they spent maybe a couple years, 5 years, even 10 years, right, building up their skill set. And then now maybe they're in a leadership position. If there's nobody in that funnel.
Yep. And that was the problem we had in the military in 1991, 92, 93. When the fall of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden, like, our peer competitor is gone. Like, I remember seeing a joke ad that put in in the ad, it says, wanted peer competitor who can go ahead and field a Navy, apply at the Pentagon. It was like a help wanted ad. But as I recall, I went to the Naval Academy that year and said, we don't need this many new junior officers. If you've got your 4-year degree and you don't want to put on a uniform, just go in peace. And they're like, really? I can leave? Yep. Free education? Yep. Out of here. And so it didn't go to zero because some people said, no, this is what I really want to do. But we do that planning as senior leaders. We have to plan 10 to 15 to 20 years in advance on the flow of what we do. And maybe we let a little bit more in than we need because we're going to have a requirement through natural attrition. Everybody who starts out at the beginning, by the time you get down to the point where, like in the Navy, you're a captain, you've lost 6 or 7 out of 8, and you want to make 1 star, you're going to lose 199 out of 200. So it gets very, very narrow at the top, and you have to have that to select from. So short-sighted HR and manpower policies that say, let's replace people with AI, it's going to bite those companies. It's going to bite them hard. Now, they're going to have to go turn to somebody else as a source. So what that's going to be is that if you manage to get in now, in 3 to 5 years, when everybody else realizes there's a huge vacuum and there's nobody out there, you can write your own ticket. But you got to talk your way in today. So maybe you go to a company that doesn't understand how to use AI, and then you get in the pipeline and then make that your hobby, because All of us do something in addition to our day jobs.
Well, that's the whole point of being a subject matter expert now is how do you know that the AI isn't hallucinating, right? Making up facts. If you don't have that background, that skill set, that expertise, how are you going to make that determination?
Well, it's interesting. You look at the hallucinations that I've found, the more precise, the more accurately you build your prompts, the less likely you are to get a hallucination. And if you understand how these large language models work, where they're just a mathematical correlation between tokens in this case usually being English words. So you feed it a few petabytes of the English language, you let it do unsupervised learning, and it says, the word the often appears before cat, but it very rarely appears after cat. And this appears, and after a while you start to getting these probability weighties. And then after a while, you can say, I can predict things. What do you mean you can predict things? If I say the word peanut butter, it's a little bit like looking at the old Terminator. Bing, 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 beep, 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 beep. Pick that up to peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then we go, whoa, it's writing something. But if we say, try the next most probable thing, it could be peanut allergies are a problem for children. And you pick another one and you get like, Peanut the squirrel was killed by the New York State Department of Agriculture, or whatever. And if we go far enough down these probability chains, you'll find change of thought that humans would have rejected immediately. I'm an old chess player, and you got to know that by the time you get 20 moves into a game of chess, the number is spectacularly huge of the possible things. And yet you can play really well because you know how to trim that tree. You get rid of 99 point some number of nines percentage of the things that don't make sense. AI doesn't do that. It ingests all of it. And so what we call a hallucination might be a 0.001% probability, but that's the highest thing that's left because it has no way of answering your question with those three magic words. I don't know. And if you have an AI model, unless you can prompt it to say any confidence factor below this number, I want you to always say, I don't know. Never give me an answer below this. Well, you might get rid of a lot of hallucinations that way. And you'll get some I don't knows, which should be better. And I do that when I go to like Lowe's and I'm looking for something. I say like, do you know where such and such is? And I tell the guy, an honest I don't know is better than a wrong answer. Because I can tell he's puzzled. He's like, yeah, I'm not sure. I says, thank you for telling me you're not sure. Like people feel comfortable with not knowing. And AI is not comfortable with not knowing. It's got to know the answer.
Well, it's got to be a great product, right? And a great product doesn't say, I don't know, at least in the minds of consumers. So
I don't even think they're thinking about that.
Should it be a tunable item, though, within these large language models, whether it's, OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or Meta, whoever's building these things, should there be a setting somewhere that says, only tell me if you're X% sure?
You might be able to prompt that in because what you have with these,
should I have to prompt it in? Should I have?
With the AI LLMs, here's the thing here. Because if you take a really low probability thing, you might say, hey, this thing just invented a new drug, or it's discovered a way to fold a protein that nobody would have thought of before. It's because it's a 0.00001. It just happened to be right. It's like winning the lottery. Statistically, someone's going to win the lottery. Statistically, I will never win the lottery. Okay, I'm okay.
Hey, you won by being on the identity side.
I'm comfortable with both of those things. So when we look there at the LLMs and setting that threshold or whatever and saying, can a user pick that? What you have is a problem called in-band signaling. Now, in-band signaling is a problem, goes all the way back to John Draper, a.k.a. Captain Crunch, and the old SS5s by being able to blow a whistle at 2600 hertz and reset the connection. Because in-band signaling means you inserted data into your data channel and it becomes executable as code. Thank you, von Neumann, for your model. In any case, what happens now is in AI, you have in-band signaling. That's what we call escapes. You can go ahead, instead of it giving the data that it needs to come up with an answer, we're inserting commands because of the way it's designed to do in-band signaling, and we have not yet perfected the way to separate the signal that's valid from the signal that's malicious. And that's really where the research needs to be done. And I guess they're trying, but I don't think the current models support that just because of the way they're architected. So should it come with a minimum threshold? It does. It's 0. Should you be able to set it higher? Try it. I haven't tried it yet. Go back to ChatGPT and any answer below 0.0001% or whatever, don't tell me. And then ask it some stupid question. And keep doing that until you get a threshold where you get an I don't know, and then maybe you'll feel comfortable with it.
Ross, you've been looking on. Do you have thoughts on this?
Say the question one more time, and then I'll.
That happens with old age. The second thing that goes with old age is your memory. I forget the first.
Well, I guess my question is should the consumer, whoever the consumer is, of a AI product that is using a large language model to make a statement, right, or answer a question, whatever it may be, should the consumer have the ability to tune it to say, okay, if you're not sure to X%, don't give me the answer? Because I have not seen that as a out-of-the-box configurable setting. Now, can you prompt it? Maybe. I haven't tried it. I will.
So I think you're right. I think you're right. I haven't seen that feature, but I'll give you a different view. If you were to ask ChatGPT, tell me about X, it'll give you a text response. But if you ask something like Perplexity to give you a thing, it will be like a college essay where it cites all of those things. I think that is going to become the new norm. Where I should be able to have a pedigree and lineage on everything, and then I can actually go and verify. Now, sure, there may be a hallucination problem where it invents this thing, but if somebody does the due diligence and looks it up, then you should be able to say, wow, this is from a trusted resource, right?
Yeah, that explainability. I remember the early part of AI was, here's just an answer, right? And then, I don't know who started it first. I want to say Bing actually started it. Yeah, but at least in the AI world, it's like, now you start to see these little numbers and asterisks and like, okay, it's starting to that. And now I'm seeing it almost all the AI products.
Try pulling the strings up on it. I know that, and it's getting better all the time, but I remember trying some early stuff with some of the OpenAI products, and it gave me a bunch of references, and every last one of them was a 404. So it was hallucinating the references. So that's...
Or worse, it's vibe coding its own answers. And all of a sudden it's a web page that looks real.
Maybe the trick is we ask one AI to validate the other AI's output. Because they're, then they have to be a syndicate if you really want to get past us. But, if Claude validates ChatGPT and says, no, this is all hallucinated, that's probably a strong indicator, and you didn't have to do all that research, right? Or maybe you ask 3 AIs to say, did the first AI make something up? And if all 3 give you a thumbs up, now you've kind of given a level of trust, right?
Well, it's almost crowdsourcing open source. What do I mean by that? If I want to get a whole copy of something like TrueCrypt, well, first of all, what version do I get? And then if I go ahead and I look around for this code, which is in different places, I find 5 of them. I download 5 copies. Well, what do? I do a SHA-256 on it, and 4 of the 5 match, and 1 doesn't match. Which is the good one? Statistically, the good one would be the 4 that match. And the one that's not matching is going to be your malware, because you've got them from all over the place. That's a pretty imprecise science. I don't know if I want to base the security. I don't know if I base this.
One might be the correct one.
And it's a possibility, and then you assign probabilities to that. But if you have no authoritative source, which is what we're talking about with AI, because if you had the authoritative source, you knew the answer, you go look it up yourself, unless you're stupid lazy, and then you don't deserve your job. But that's this other thing.
That's a totally different.
This is totally different. That's a different episode.
And podcast.
But if you're the podcast for the stupid and lazy, the Procrastinators podcast show. We start next week. And
listen, whenever.
Maybe. Yeah. We've been starting next week for the last several years. But back to the idea of being able to know the fidelity and being able the provenance of data. And really it ties back to identity. It's the provenance of the identity of the information. We think of identity as being human identity, human actors, non-human actors. But what if your information is assigned an identity? That's a little bit different model, but what would you run with that? Don't dismiss it out of hand. Sit around, think about it, discuss it a little bit, and say, if information had identity, how would that be manifested? Would it be a label? Would it be inherent in it? Would it be embedded in the information? Would it be containerized? How would it interact with other identity providers? Would we have an identity provider for information? How would they validate that identity? And this is a whole, maybe you guys have covered this up, but if I were to say, hey, go sit in the corner with a bunch of smart people and invent something, then identity, that's what I would start with. And maybe one of your listeners could be on Shark Tank in a few months saying, hello, sharks.
I got an idea for you. What if? Well, I think there's a lot of companies right now that have settled on sort of this matrix or graph-based, identity thing that's like, all right, how do you do a one-to-many or many-to-one relationship? that's just what we have now, right? Somebody will figure out a better way to do things. I do want to be respectful of time. We're here at the conference. We didn't really get to talk so much about CISO Tradecraft itself, though. So I want to do the hot wing style right now. Tell the people what you got going on, where it's like, tell us about the podcast itself. Give us like the elevator pitch, because I think the people listening to this are generally identity people, but we are part of information security.
If they weren't identity people, they still would not be listening after this much time. Okay.
Right, yeah.
So both of you people are still listening.
So where do I get the podcast? What is it about? How often do you put out episodes? Let's just kind of tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the podcast can easily be found on all your favorite podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, any of those things.
YouTube, we have videos, or you can go to CISOTradecraft.com. And the focus of our show is how do we train the next generation of cybersecurity leaders? So think of a lot of people can teach you more technical things, like here's how to go configure DMARC on an email. We don't do that. What we do focus on is how do you lead an identity access management program? How do you build an application security program? What metrics would you use to gamify vulnerability management? And then what do you do when you take those budgets to the chief financial officer? How do you actually socialize and get adoption from 10,000 developers in your organization? That level of leadership and stewardship is what we try to build with our Tradecraft.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned DMARC. Really, I had to fix a DMARC record over the weekend. By the way, if you use Comcast.com or Yahoo and your DMARC record says none, in terms of what you do with things that doesn't pass, it's going to reject your messages and delete them. And you can get non-delivery problems. That's something I just figured out this past weekend when I got a panic message from we can't get the emails through to Comcast. And I pull the string. It's like, oh, how about that? It's a config change. So
Gmark with the DMARC.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. In any case, the idea with the podcast is to be able to provide a body of knowledge for cybersecurity professionals who want to aspire to or stay in the executive suite. There's a whole bunch of information that is not technical that's required to be effective. The best CISOs are not technical experts. We've had a discussion, CISO versus vCISO. On a vCISO, sometimes you don't have a lot of depth in your IT team, and you might have to roll up your sleeves and climb under a desk. You tend not to do that as a Fortune and CISO. But nonetheless, whether you have a background in GRC, whether it's in technology, whether it's in government, whatever it happens to be, identity, those are the tools that you bring to the job. Our goal is to ensure that you remain aware of what is required to be successful in your job and your career. If you still have a ways to go in your career, how to get to the next level, what are the things going to work for you, and how to stay at the top. This is not really for newbies. A newbie doesn't care about how do you brief a board of directors. Newbie doesn't care about reading a corporate financial statement. But as a CISO, you need to know these skills. So what we've done then is, kind of also the genesis of it is that I used to exhibit at trade shows for years and years. We're talking about, I think you said this is your first info?
First for this one, yeah.
Okay. I've been for almost 30 years. I spoke here in 1997, 98, and 2000 I had the best attended talk. It was called PK I Don't Think So. And the next year...
It's all about the name.
It is about the name. I got to do the keynote. I did 3 keynotes here. The last year I did the keynote. The next year they had William Shatner as the keynote. Look it up. It was 2006. Bill Shatner keynoted this thing. I think he got paid better than I did. But the point is that because of our audience, there is strength in terms of the peer group. And so for our subscribers and our followers for CISO Tradecraft, we put episodes out every single week. Comment on them. Provide a big string on LinkedIn so that we get good, smart people talking to each other, and then build your network based upon the core that we've created. So we're really trying to create a community of both practice as well as thought for chief information security officers.
I see you guys, that's such a great chemistry. Different personalities, it makes for an interesting episode, I'm sure. I always find it crazy that people always say, how do you guys keep coming up with topics? To me, it's like, how do you narrow down the topics? And seriously, there's so much to talk about that once a week is barely enough to address everything.
Well, you're right. I didn't think we'd be going this far, but the input queue just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it's also partially because of Gmark's law. Remember, half of what you know is obsolete in 18 months. So you go back 18 months, And half of those episodes before that probably have been overcome by events.
It's a time capsule, right? This is what was happening at that point in time.
Yeah,
and this is what people are thinking about.
If your RSA 128-bit keys and maybe we should upgrade these things, stuff like. But more to the point, it does provide a historical reference. And because what we do on our GitHub page, if you go to CISOTradecraft.com and click on the GitHub, you'll see it broken out into 10 different domains. So you say, I really want to go ahead and focus on this area of my CISO skill set, rather than that do so, and then boom, these are the 15 episodes that are on that subject. So it really helps people go ahead and pick through the library. We don't have a Dewey Decimal System for it, but something similar.
We just go straight numbers and then, keyword, find it that way. Like, we're going to try to find it. Well, I'm really glad we met. We're going to wrap up. We always do it on a lighter note. That's just kind of our style. And since we're all, podcasters, what better question than say, if you were going to start a podcast, but it's not InfoSec, it's not security, it's something else, what podcast would you start? What would it be about? Ross, you get to go first.
So I've thought about this, and I may do it. I don't know if I will. But me and my kids play this Roblox game called Bloxfruit. It's a One Piece themed game. So if you like Japanese anime and you're like, I need to watch more than the cartoon, I got to play the video game on Roblox, I would do a channel to teach dads how to connect with their kids, because I've been playing with my 4 kids video games. And I think there's a lot of dads who could, connect with their kids, or maybe moms connect with their kids playing video games, but they haven't the foggiest idea of how do I get into this world of video gaming with my kids? And I think that'd be a really interesting adventure.
Yeah, it's super cool. You're hitting on something that's like in the zeitgeist, right, too? So I hate to say it, but the total addressable market for that podcast might be way better than anything than what we're doing right now. What about you, G-Mark?
I think my total addressable market could be a lot smaller because, like I said, the give back phase are fair.
We're trying to help you get to the next stage. So if you say, create a podcast, it would be a podcast about self-referential. Why? Because a lot of people out there with great ideas who have good networks who are not quite sure how to get going. They don't know, hey, how about this microphone? How about this phone? How about that laptop? How about the recording equipment? How about that hairstyle? Whatever it happens to be. That is going to make you more successful. So that might not be a 256 episode podcast, but it would be helping people get that information out and preview all the way what you're already doing is so that the people who want to listen to the message that you have, you'll be able to reach it, and they'll be able to run that in their lives. So that's the thing. That's why you do a podcast. It's not to listen to yourself talk. There's a lot better ways to skin to talk. But if we're doing it, is you're trying to help other people's lives and careers, it's just rewarding. And I'd love to be able to help more people. Yes.
I would absolutely subscribe to that, because I subscribe to podcast or YouTubers today that are all about audio, visual, right? What are the right cameras? Lighting, audio, editing, right, all that stuff. And, if you listen to episode 1 of this podcast,
There's recorded on Teams.
it was, I think it was probably a Zoom
Zoom,
on
yeah.
a condenser microphone in a very echoey basement with, seemed to be made of nothing but echoes.
Wayne's World.
Right, yeah. And to listen to that episode and then to listen to something, more recent, that's all stuff that I learned doing that stuff. And I totally relied on that concept of people who are willing to take the time. Yes, they're YouTubers.
Oh, good. Maybe this is my first games.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do it. How about you, Jim? What's a podcast you start?
So in July, I moved to the Black Hills of South Dakota. And when I tell everybody that, I always get a similar reaction, which is,
John Strand.
wow, it's like, wow, that's really cool. And why did you move there? And I think there's just so much that people don't know about that area, but people are interested. Maybe they know that Mount Rushmore is there, or the Sturgis Bike Rally, or the Badlands. So I just feel like that has endless topics, and I'm still exploring and learning about it. So I get to learn as I was building the podcast. I think it'd be a fun topic. What about you?
I feel like a Black Mountains influencer of some sort.
Yes, Black Hills, by the way.
Black Hills, yeah. I've been to the Black Hills. It's very, very cool, especially at night.
Yeah.
Where there's no light pollution. You actually see, the stars in the galaxy.
So the reason why they call it the Black Hills, by the way, is that there are these pine trees that are on the hills. There's hills. They're not quite mountains, but they're somewhere in between. And when you see them from a distance, they look black, and it makes the hills look black. And it was actually the native populations that named them Black Hills, and in their local language.
I don't know what I would do. I think I am at the phase of my life where I just like to talk with people and find out what they're thinking about different things.
Yes, with people who don't know what they want to do.
So something along those lines, like, yeah, it's just, a standard talk show, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, tell me about yourself. What's that like? You have this position on something. What's that like? Comment on that. I mean, I think I've probably mentioned on this show, I'm a big fan of the Bennington show on XM or Sirius now. It's just kind of a radio show about anything and everything. It's part comedy, it's part news, it's part sports, kind of over everything. It reminds me of going and back and sitting on the couch with my friends when I was, in my early years, and just talking about the world and what's going on and trying to understand different viewpoints. And so I think there's a market for that. I hope at some point. But it's just, hey, Ron, you came up, man, and you're like, now we're doing a podcast. What, 3 hours later? Like, that's the kind of thing I think is super cool, and having that connection and being able to do that.
Spontaneous podcast. That's your show.
We don't know when it'll happen. It will happen at some point, and that kind of thing. So,
Jeff and Jim, thanks for having us on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being part of this. And Ross, again, thanks for coming up. We'll encourage people to go out, visit CISO Tradecraft.com. I'll have links in our show notes for people to look that out. Again, shout out to Shirley and Cyber Risk Alliance and RSM for helping us out here. And we'll go ahead and leave it there for this week. Find us on the web, idacpodcast.com. Like, subscribe, do all that cool stuff. And we'll talk with everyone the next time.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.